What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're heading deep into one of the most remote and isolated places in the entire United States, the Appalachian Trail. Stretching over 2,000 miles through dense forests, mountain ridges, and valleys that barely see daylight, the AT has long been a place where hikers go to find peace, nature, and themselves. But sometimes, they find something else entirely, something that doesn't belong, something that was watching them long before they ever set foot on that trail. The stories you're about to hear were all shared on Reddit by real people, people who went into the woods and came back changed. Some of them say they still haven't fully recovered, and honestly, after reading these, I don't blame them. Get comfortable, turn the lights down, and whatever you do, don't go outside tonight. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Man on the Ridge. This story was posted by a user who goes by the name TrailDustAT on one of the bigger hiking subreddits. He titled his post, "I saw something on the ridge that I can't explain and I need to talk about it." He starts by saying he's been hiking sections of the Appalachian Trail for about 6 years. Not a newbie, not someone who spooks easily. He'd done solo trips through some of the most isolated sections of the trail and never had a single incident. He knew the woods, he respected the woods, and he thought the woods respected him back. That changed on a solo trip through a section of the trail running through western North Carolina. He'd taken 4 days off work, packed light, and set out with the plan of covering about 15 miles a day. Nothing crazy, just a comfortable pace with time to enjoy the views. The weather was perfect. Mid-October, the leaves were turning, the air was cold and clean. He said it felt like a dream for the first 2 days. He made camp on the evening of day 2 near a small creek, just off the trail under a heavy canopy of oak trees. The spot was isolated. He hadn't seen another hiker since noon that day. He set up his tent, cooked some instant mac and cheese over a little backpacking stove, and settled in as the sun started dropping behind the ridge to the west. That's when he noticed the figure. He described it as a man, at least he thought it was a man, standing completely still on the ridgeline maybe 200 yards above him, just standing there, watching. He said at first he thought it was another hiker who'd stopped to look at the view, but something immediately felt wrong about it. The figure wasn't moving at all, not shifting weight, not looking around, not doing anything hikers naturally do when they stop. It was just fixed, like a post someone had stuck in the ground. He watched it for a few minutes, then looked away to tend to his food. When he looked back, the figure was gone. He told himself it was nothing, maybe another hiker who'd moved on, maybe a weird tree formation that looked like a person from a distance. He'd heard of that before, pareidolia, the brain seeing faces and figures in random shapes. That had to be it. He climbed into his tent when it got dark, zipped himself in, and spent about an hour reading on his phone before he turned off the flashlight and tried to sleep. He said he was almost out when he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the dead leaves just outside his tent. Not the skittery random movement of an animal. Something walking upright, something with a long stride, taking its time, circling his tent slowly like it was measuring the perimeter. He lay perfectly still, his heart slamming against his ribs hard enough he was sure it could be heard outside. He held his breath. The footsteps stopped. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Then, right next to his head, separated only by the thin nylon wall of his tent, something crouched down. He could hear it, the soft compression of leaves under weight, and then, barely audible, breathing. Long, slow, controlled breathing, like something that was very deliberately trying to be quiet. He said he didn't move for what felt like an hour. He had a knife in his pack, but didn't dare reach for it. He was convinced that if he made a single sound, whatever was outside would come through the tent wall. Eventually, the breathing stopped. Then came the sound of slow footsteps again, moving away, back towards the ridge, fading into the darkness. He didn't sleep that night, not 1 minute. In the morning, he packed up as fast as he'd ever packed anything and got back on the trail. He covered almost 20 miles that day, far more than planned, just to get out. He didn't stop for breaks, he barely ate, he just walked. But here's the part that stuck with me the most. When he got back to the trailhead parking lot and loaded his gear into his car, he noticed something on his driver's side window, a smear, long, deliberate, made by a finger. Someone had drawn a single vertical line down the glass. His car was locked, alone in a remote parking lot for 2 days. He never figured out who or what left it there, and to this day, he says he still feels like he's being watched whenever he drives past a ridgeline at dusk. Story 2. The Shelter. This one comes from a user named Ren on Trail, a woman who'd been section hiking the AT for about 3 years. She's clear in her post that she's not a fearful person, not prone to exaggeration, and that she's sharing her story because she genuinely doesn't know what else to do with it. It happened on a stretch of trail in Virginia, near one of the older 3-sided shelters that dot the Appalachian Trail every 8 to 10 miles or so. If you've never seen these shelters, they're basically opened wooden structures, 3 walls, a sloped roof, a raised wooden floor to sleep on. They're first come, first served, and on busy nights they can get pretty crowded. On quiet nights, you might have the whole thing to yourself. Ren arrived at the shelter around 5:30 in the evening after a long day's hike. She was the only one there. She signed the trail register, that's the little notebook shelters keep where hikers write their names, dates, and sometimes notes, and settled in for the night. She didn't bother pitching her tent since the weather was clear and the shelter was dry. She read through some of the older register entries while eating dinner. Most were normal. Beautiful views today. Left food for whoever comes next. Watch out for the steep section before the gap. But about halfway through the register, maybe 40 pages back, and dated about 3 months earlier, one entry made her pause. It said, "Something is living under this shelter. Do not stay here at night. I am serious. Do not stay here." No name, just those 3 sentences and a shaky signature she couldn't read. She almost laughed it off. Almost. She told herself it was probably some dramatic hiker trying to be funny. The trail attracts all kinds, and some people get a kick out of spooking the next person in the register. She set up her sleeping pad, crawled into her sleeping bag, and pulled out her book. It was around 9 o'clock when she heard the first sound. It came from directly below her, from beneath the wooden platform she was lying on. A slow, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails or claws, dragging across the underside of the floorboards, back and forth, steady, patient. She froze. The scratching continued for a minute, then stopped. She sat up and shone her headlamp toward the open front of the shelter, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just dark trees and the soft sound of wind. Then the scratching started again, slower this time, and she realized it was moving. Whatever was making that sound was dragging itself along the underside of the floor toward the opening, toward the front. She grabbed her pack and her sleeping bag and got out of that shelter in about 4 seconds flat. She stood in the clearing in front of the structure, headlamp blazing, watching the opening. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a hand appeared at the edge of the floor. A human hand, pale, thin-fingered, gripping the edge of the wooden platform from below. Just sitting there, not moving, not pulling up, just holding on, like whatever it was attached to was waiting. She ran. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just took off down the trail in the pitch dark with her headlamp bouncing and her heart in her throat. She ran for nearly a mile before she stopped and finally looked behind her. The trail was empty. She made camp right there in the dark, off-trail, hidden behind a cluster of thick hemlocks. She didn't sleep. She watched the tree line until gray light finally crept through the canopy at dawn. She hiked out the next morning and reported what she saw to a ranger. She said the ranger's expression changed when she mentioned the shelter. He didn't say anything. He just wrote something down and told her they'd look into it. She never heard back. When she checked the trail register entry online, hikers sometimes post photos. The page with that warning had been torn out. Story 3. The Other Campsite. This story comes from a user named Kellaway Hikes, and the way he opens his post tells you everything you need to know about how much this experience affected him. He says he held on to it for almost 2 years before he could bring himself to type it out. 2 years of sitting with something that had no explanation, no resolution, and no comfortable place to file it away in his mind. He says he finally posted it because keeping it inside had started to feel worse than the embarrassment of being laughed at. That's a significant thing to admit. That's a man who has run out of other options. He wants you to understand the context before he gets into it, because the context matters. This wasn't just a camping trip. He and his younger brother, he refers to him throughout the post only as D, had planned a 4-day section hike on the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee as a way of grieving. Their father had passed away earlier that year, unexpectedly, and the loss had hit both of them hard in ways they were still trying to figure out how to carry. Their dad had been the outdoorsman of the family, the one who'd taken them on their first camping trips as kids, who'd taught them how to read a trail map and hang a bear bag and identify bird calls. Getting out onto the trail felt like the right way to honor him, like the closest they could get to still being with him. They set out on a Thursday morning in early June. The weather was warm, but not brutal, the kind of early summer mountain weather that feels like a gift. Blue skies, a breeze moving through the tree canopy, the trail soft underfoot from a rain a few days earlier. Kellaway says they talked constantly for the first several miles, stories about their dad, funny ones mostly. The time he got them completely lost on a trail in the Smokies and refused to admit it for 4 hours. The way he'd always overpacked food because he was convinced they'd run out. The strange little rituals he had, always tapping the trailhead sign twice before heading in, always saying good morning out loud to the first bird he heard. They laughed a lot. It felt good. It felt like exactly what they'd needed. The first night was perfect in every way. They found a wide, flat camping spot right off the trail with a stone fire ring already in place, clearly well used by hikers before them. They cooked hot dogs on sticks over the fire like they were 12 years old again. Watched the fire burn down to coals, talked until they were too tired to keep their eyes open. Kellaway says he fell asleep that night feeling, for the first time since his father died, genuinely okay, like something had loosened just slightly in his chest. The second night is where the trip changed direction. They'd covered good ground by late afternoon and started looking for a place to camp around 5 o'clock. The main trail through that section was heavily wooded with limited flat spots, but Kellaway spotted a narrow spur path branching off to the left, barely marked, the kind of side trail that experienced hikers sometimes know about and day trippers never find. He followed it maybe 100 yards and it opened up into what he described as one of the best natural campsites he'd ever stumbled onto. A shallow bowl shape in the hillside, naturally sheltered on 3 sides by the rising terrain, the floor carpeted in pine needles, with a gap in the canopy directly overhead that gave a clean view of the sky. No wind, no noise from the main trail, just quiet. Dee agreed immediately. They dropped their packs and started setting up. That's when Kellaway noticed the other tent. It was set back deeper in the trees, maybe 60 yards from where they were pitching their own camp, partially hidden by the shadow of a large hemlock. An older tent, not modern gear, not the lightweight nylon stuff hikers use today. A canvas-style tent, the kind that was common 40 or 50 years ago. Faded army green, the fabric visibly aged, one of the guy lines slack and dragging on the ground. It looked like it had been there for a while, though he couldn't say exactly why he felt that way. Just the look of it, the way it sat in the space. No fire outside it, no light from within, no sounds, no gear scattered around the entrance like campers usually leave things, no boots, no water bottles, no camp chair. Just the tent, silent and still in the shadow of the trees. He pointed it out to Dee, who looked over, shrugged, and said whoever it was had probably turned in early. Long day, early night, nothing unusual about that on the trail. Kellaway nodded and let it go, but he kept looking at it. Through dinner, while they got their fire going, while they ate and talked and tried to continue the easy rhythm of the night before, his eyes kept drifting back to that tent, not because he'd decided something was wrong with it, more like his attention was being pulled there without his full permission. Nobody came out of it, not to get water, not to use the bathroom, which every camper has to do eventually, not to check the weather or stretch their legs or stir at all.
The tent just sat there in the same fixed position, completely inert, like a prop placed in the woods rather than anything a living person had put up. He watched it for 2 straight hours while the firelight played across the campsite, and it never moved once. Around 10 o'clock, the fire had burned low enough that they decided to call it. They scattered the coals, hung their food bags, and ducked into their respective tents. Kellaway lay on his back in the dark, hands folded on his chest, and tried to sleep. He was tired. His legs ached from the day's miles. His shoulders were sore from the pack. His body wanted sleep badly, but his mind kept circling back to that tent. He couldn't identify the specific thing that bothered him about it. It wasn't one detail he could point to. It was the sum of everything. The age of it, the silence, the complete absence of any human trace around it. About 30 minutes, he unzipped the small mesh window on the inner door of his tent and looked towards where the tent had been. The spot was empty. Just trees. Dark forest. The hemlock still standing where it had been, but the ground beneath it bare. No tent, no guy lines, nothing. He stared at it for a long time. He told himself the darkness was distorting his sense of direction, that he was looking at the wrong patch of trees, and the tent was still there and he just couldn't pick it out in the dark. He was tired. His depth perception at night had never been great. He closed his eyes and told himself firmly that there was a normal explanation and he was going to stop thinking about it. Eventually, somehow, he slept. He woke to the sound of his brother's voice. Not a yell, not a cry, a voice. Quiet and conversational, the relaxed tone of someone sitting across a table from a friend, chatting about nothing in particular. Calm and easy, like Dee was perfectly comfortable wherever he was and whatever he was doing. Kellaway unzipped his tent and stepped out into the cold dark. Dee was sitting on the far side of the dead fire pit, cross-legged on the bare ground, his back partially towards Kellaway and his face turned towards the tree line at the edge of the camp. He was speaking in a low, steady murmur, too quiet for Kellaway to make out specific words, but rhythmic, like someone in the middle of a long and comfortable story. Nobody was across from him, no shape in the darkness. He was talking to the trees. Kellaway said his name. Dee kept talking. He said it again, louder. Dee's voice trailed off and he turned around slowly, and Kellaway says the expression on his face stopped him cold. Not confused, not startled. Just empty, hollowed out, the look of someone whose body is present but whose self had stepped out for a moment. No recognition in his eyes, just blank, flat absence. Then Dee blinked, once, twice, and the expression broke like a film dissolving, replaced by ordinary confusion. "Why are you yelling? I'm right here." Kellaway asked him who he was talking to. Dee looked back at the tree line, genuinely confused, like he was searching for the answer to a question he should have known. Then he said he didn't know. Said he didn't remember leaving his tent. The last thing he was aware of was being asleep inside it. Neither of them said much after that. They sat by the cold fire pit until the sky went gray and dawn light started filling in through the trees. Then they packed up everything without a word and started hiking out. They were a mile from the trailhead when Dee finally broke the silence. He said the last thing he remembered before Kellaway woke him was a dream. In the dream, their dad was standing at the edge of the trees, right where Dee had been staring when Kellaway found him. Standing there in the clothes he usually wore on hikes, old flannel shirt, the worn brown boots he'd had for decades, smiling, waving Dee over with one hand, easy and relaxed, like he had something to show him just a little further in. Kellaway didn't respond. He didn't know what to say to that. They reached the trailhead parking lot and loaded their gear into the car. Kellaway closed the trunk, and before he got in, he turned and looked back up the trail one last time, the way you do at the end of a trip, that final look before you leave the woods behind. Far up the hillside, barely visible through the gaps between the trees, sitting in the shadow of the ridge exactly where it had no business being, a faded green tent. He got in the car. He didn't tell Dee. He hasn't gone back to that section of the trail, and he says he's thought a lot, maybe too much, about exactly what was standing at the edge of those trees in his brother's dream, smiling and waving Dee over, asking to come a little further in. He's not sure it was their father.
Story 4. The voice below the trail. The last story tonight comes from a user called pinesap_runner, a trail runner who regularly does long solo runs on sections of the Appalachian Trail. She's been doing this for years, not casually, not occasionally, but seriously and consistently. The kind of person who maps out routes weeks in advance and tracks her splits down to the second. She runs in low light. She runs in rain. She's been charged by a black bear on a trail in North Carolina, stood her ground, and walked away fine. She does not scare easily. She says all of this in the opening of her post almost defensively, like she needs us to understand something important before she gets into it, like she's pre-answering the skeptics, like she already knows how it's going to sound and she needs you to believe her anyway. That defensive tone, honestly, is part of what made this one take her seriously. People who make things up don't usually lead with their own vulnerability. She was running a 12-mile section of the AT in northern Georgia on an early Saturday morning in late September. She'd parked at a small trailhead lot just off a rural highway before 4 in the morning. She says she always starts before dawn when she can. She loves that window of time on the trail. The way the forest is completely black except for the small circle of light thrown by her headlamp. The way sound travels differently before sunrise, sharper, cleaner, more honest somehow. She says it's the only time she ever truly feels alone in a good way, like the world belongs just to her and the trees. She signed in to no app, told no one where she was going. That was normal for her. She'd done solo pre-dawn runs dozens of times without issue. She had her headlamp strapped to her forehead, her phone tucked in the chest pocket of her running vest, her emergency whistle on a cord around her wrist. She was prepared. She was comfortable. She set off into the dark. The first 4 miles went exactly the way she wanted. The air was cold and smelled like wet earth and pine. Her legs felt good. The trail was dry and the grade was manageable, rolling up and over a couple of small knolls before beginning a longer traverse along the western face of a ridge. She fell into her rhythm, that quiet, almost meditative state that distance runners know, and stopped thinking about anything in particular. That's when she heard it. The trail at that point was cutting along the side of a steep ridge, the slope dropping sharply away to her left into a wall of dense underbrush, mountain laurel, and tangled deadfall that gave way to a ravine somewhere in the darkness below, maybe 30, maybe 40 feet down. She couldn't see the bottom. Her headlamp beam hit the tops of the shrubs and got swallowed. What she heard was a voice coming down there. Not a shout, not a scream, not the panicked cry of someone who'd fallen and was hurt, just a flat conversational calling out, the kind of tone you'd use if you were standing in your backyard calling to a neighbor across the fence, almost bored, almost casual. Hello? A pause. Hello? Another pause. Hello? She stopped running immediately. Her headlamp swept down the slope, but the beam didn't reach anything useful, just leaves and branches and darkness swallowing itself. Her first instinct, because she's the kind of person she is, was concerned. Someone had maybe gone off trail and gotten turned around in the dark. Maybe they'd slipped down into the ravine and were calling for help in that weirdly calm way people sometimes do when they're in shock. She's had wilderness first aid training. She wasn't going to just keep running. She called down, asked if someone was there, asked if they needed help. Her voice felt very small against the hillside. The voice stopped. Complete silence rushed in behind it like water filling a hole, and she described this silence in a way that really got to me. She said it didn't feel like ordinary quiet. It felt pressurized, dense, like the forest had inhaled and was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Even the insects went still. Even the wind dropped to nothing. She stood on that trail in the dark, sweating from her run, listening to absolutely nothing, and felt the first real finger of unease start to move up the back of her neck. She waited a full minute, maybe more. Then the voice came back, but it wasn't the same as before. Before, it had seemed to be coming from the bottom of the ravine, muffled by distance in the thick tangle of brush between them. This time, it sounded like it was directly below her, right below the section of trail where she was standing, as if whatever was making that sound had crossed 40 feet of steep, choked hillside in total silence and total darkness in under 60 seconds. And this time, it wasn't saying hello. It said her name, her full name,
first and last, spoken clearly, in that same flat, almost bored tone, like it was reading from a list, like her name was just a fact it was confirming out loud. She told us later that she'd had moments in her life of genuine fear: the bear encounter, a car accident when she was 19, a bad fall on a technical trail that left her alone and bleeding a mile from the nearest road. She knows what fear feels like in her body. She said none of those moments felt like this. This was something colder and more fundamental. Not the fear of pain or injury, the fear of something being profoundly, cosmically wrong. The fear that the world had just quietly revealed a rule she didn't know existed, and that rule was not in her favor. She ran. Not the smooth, controlled stride of someone who knows how to pace themselves over distance. A full sprint. A panicked, adrenaline-soaked survival sprint. Her headlamp bounced wildly with every footfall, throwing crazy shadows through the trees on either side of the trail. She hit rocks she couldn't see and stumbled but didn't go down. She grabbed tree trunks when the grade steepened, used them to sling herself forward faster. She didn't look back once. She was not going to look back. Some part of her brain had made that decision automatically and locked it in place. She covered the remaining 8 miles, most of it, without stopping, without slowing, without looking behind her a single time. When she finally broke out of the tree line and hit the gravel of the trailhead parking lot, her car was the only one there, sitting under the pale gray of early dawn exactly where she'd left it. She fumbled through her vest pocket for her keys, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped them twice on the gravel before she got the door unlocked. She got in, she locked the doors, and she sat there in the driver's seat with the engine running and the heat on, shaking and gasping for nearly 20 minutes before she felt like she could safely drive. When she finally calmed down enough to think in a straight line, she started working through it. She wanted a rational answer. She's a logical person, and she wanted one badly. Sound does strange things in mountain terrain. It bounces off ridge faces, gets channeled by ravines, can make a voice seem much closer or further than it actually is. She knew that. Maybe someone down in that ravine heard her running and called out, and the acoustics of the slope had warped the sound of their voice into something that only resembled her name. Maybe she'd been in a hyper-focused running state, and her brain had pattern-matched some random sound into familiar syllables. That happens. It's a real thing. But she couldn't get past one part. She checked her social media accounts carefully when she got home. None of them displayed her full name in connection with her running out profile. Her running out profile used a username, not her real name. She hadn't told a single person where she was going that morning. There was no GPS tag on any post from that day. No one who knew her would have had any reason to be in that ravine before 4 in the morning on a Saturday. There was simply no mechanism by which any person in that ravine should have known her name. None. She posted the full account on Reddit a few days later, partly to process it and partly hoping someone would hand her the explanation she couldn't find on her own. Most responses were fear and sympathy, and people sharing their own unsettling trail experiences. A handful of other runners and hikers chimed in to say they'd had eerily similar things happen on that same general section of trail. Sounds from the ravine, voices that shouldn't have been there, a sense of being tracked by something that moved through the undergrowth faster than anything had a right to. And then one comment came in from an account that appears to have been deleted sometime in the days following. It said nothing elaborate, no long explanation, no theory, just this: whatever is down in that ravine has been there for a long time. Don't go back. She hasn't, and reading her post, I don't think she ever will. And that's where we're going to leave it tonight. 4 stories, 4 people who went into the Appalachian wilderness looking for peace, for adventure, for a little connection with nature, and found something that has no business being out there. The Appalachian Trail stretches through 14 states. Millions of people hike it every year. Most of them come back with nothing but great memories and sore feet. But some of them come back with something else entirely. Something they carry quietly. Something that wakes them up at 3 in the morning with the feeling that they are not alone. If you're planning a trip to the AT, I'm not trying to scare you off. It's a beautiful place. Just pay attention to your surroundings. Trust your instincts. And if you hear your name called from somewhere it shouldn't be coming from, don't answer. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Leave a comment if you've had your own experience on the Appalachian Trail, because I read all of them. And I'll see you in the next one.
Sleep tight.